All right, let's do it. Time for a deep dive into Indiana versus Oregon. Got my coffee, got my notes, ready to break down this game.
Yeah, we've got a ton of articles and predictions to dig into. Everything from betting odds to in-depth statistical breakdowns. You'll be ready to impress your friends with some serious basketball knowledge after this.
Sounds like a plan. So let's set the scene. Big picture, what are we looking at here?
Okay, first things first. This game is huge for both teams. They're both fighting for a spot in the tournament, so a win here is crucial. Oregon's slightly favored to win. The spread is somewhere between 5.5 and 6.5 points, depending on who you ask. But Indiana has been on a tear lately, so an upset is definitely possible.
Yeah, those late season games always get my heart racing. Oregon is 21-8 overall this season with a 10-8 conference record. Indiana's trailing a bit at 18-11 overall, 9-9 in their conference. Pretty close though, right?
Yeah, for sure. But it's interesting to note that Oregon's schedule has been way tougher. They've played more ranked opponents, which explains their strong overall record even with a slightly weaker conference performance.
So they've really had to fight for those wins. Do you think that gives them an edge in a pressure situation like this game?
It's definitely something to consider. But to really get a feel for how this game might go, let's look at some stats.
All right, hit me with those numbers. What's jumping out at you?
Well, one stat that really stands out is rebounding. Indiana absolutely dominates the boards. Their rebounding margin is plus 7.6 in conference play compared to Oregon's negative 0.25. That's a huge difference.
Wow, that is a big difference. So that got to be a key factor for Indiana, right?
It could be. More rebounds often means more second chance points and fewer possessions for the other team. But it's not the only thing that matters. Oregon actually averages slightly more points per game than Indiana, 76.8 to Indiana's 75.9. But as we said earlier, Indiana has had an easier schedule.
So they've been efficient, but against weaker competition. What should our listener be watching for to see if that efficiency holds up against Oregon?
Good question. It really comes down to their offensive execution. Indiana's assist-to-turnover ratio is super high, meaning they move the ball well and don't make a lot of mistakes. Oregon might try to disrupt that flow with a full-court press or aggressive defense to force some turnovers.
So we could see a real battle of styles there. Now, we can't talk college basketball without talking about the players. Are there any standout players our listeners should be keeping an eye on?
Oh, absolutely. On the Indiana side, the name that jumps out is Oumar Ballo. This guy is a force. He scored over 1,600 points in his career, over 1,100 rebounds, and has an incredible 42 double-doubles.
Wow, those are some serious stats.
Yeah.
Do the sources mention any weaknesses in his game that Oregon could exploit?
Well, even though he dominates in the paint, he can be prone to foul trouble. So Oregon might try to attack him early and get him off the court.
So a bit of a strategic battle there.
Yeah.
What about Oregon? Anyone on their side who can match Ballo's impact?
They have some really talented players like Nate Biddle and Supreme Cook, but their stats don't quite stack up to Ballo's. However, Oregon's strength lies in their balanced scoring. They've got multiple players who can put up points, so they're not as reliant on any one individual.
Okay, so we've got a potential rebounding battle brewing, a clash of offensive styles, and some intriguing individual matchups. I'm already excited for this game.
Me too. And we haven't even talked about the predictions yet.
Oh, right. What do the experts think? Do they favor Oregon's balanced scoring and tough schedule, or Indiana's rebounding and efficient offense?
Well, that's where things get interesting. The sources are kind of split, so let's dive into those predictions and see if we can figure out who has the edge. Yeah, so looking at the predictions, it's interesting. A lot of the sources are kind of split on this one. Some are leaning towards Oregon, you know. They point to their strong home record and the fact that they've won 5 straight games. But there are others who think Indiana might pull off the upset, especially with Ballo's potential to just dominate the boards. Plus, remember that interesting stat we talked about? Oregon has historically struggled against non-ranked teams at night. It's
Right, I remember that. Oregon,
Yes.
struggling against non-ranked teams at night. Why is that? Do the sources give any explanation?
You know, it's kind of a mystery. They don't give a definitive answer, but there's some speculation that it could be like a psychological thing. Maybe they subconsciously let down their guard a little bit when they're playing a team they think is weaker. Or maybe the pressure of playing at home under the lights, gets to them.
So that could be a bit of an advantage for Indiana. But wait, fine. I also remember reading something about Indiana's first half performance against Big Ten opponents. They haven't always looked so great early in games, right?
Yeah, that's true. They've had a tendency to start a little slow against those tougher conference rivals. If that happens again tonight, it could give Oregon an early lead, which might be hard for Indiana to overcome, especially in a hostile environment like Oregon's home court.
So it's like, on the one hand, we've got Oregon strong at home, but maybe a little vulnerable against non-ranked teams at night. And then on the other hand, we've got Indiana on a winning streak, but prone to some slow starts. It's like a game of mental chess out there.
Exactly. It adds this whole other layer of complexity to this matchup. And, speaking of mental games, one thing the sources brought up that I found really interesting is momentum. Both of these teams are coming in hot. Indiana has won 3 in a row, Oregon's won 5 straight, and that kind of momentum can have a huge psychological impact.
Right. It's not just physical momentum. It's like a confidence thing, too.
Absolutely. Think about it. Oregon is the favorite. They're playing at home. Everyone expects them to win. That can be a lot of pressure, especially in a game with this much on the line. Whereas Indiana might feel a sense of freedom. They're the underdog, they've got nothing to lose, and sometimes that mentality can be really dangerous.
So we've covered the stats, we've looked at the players, we've even talked about the psychology of the game. Our listeners are practically experts at this point, but they still need to make a prediction. Any advice for our listeners who are trying to decide who to pick?
Well, first I would say, consider the point spread. Oregon is favored by 5.5 to 6.5 points. But considering how close this game is likely to be, that's not a sure thing, especially with a potential X factor like Umar Bilal out there. And don't forget the over-under, which is currently sitting at around 147.5 points. Based on Indiana's solid defense and Oregon's tendency to score a lot of points, it's really a toss-up.
It's hard to know which way to go.
Yeah, there are a lot of variables in play here, but at the end of the day, I think the best advice is to just trust your gut. You've learned so much about these teams. You started to see the nuances of this matchup. Now just take all that knowledge and combine it with your own intuition.
Great advice. And even if you don't predict the winner correctly, this game is going to be so much fun to watch.
I totally agree. This one has all the makings of a classic March Madness thriller.
Before we wrap up, I'm curious about something. We've talked a lot about the players and the stats, but what about the coaches? Do the sources mention anything about their coaching styles and how that might influence the game?
Yeah, they do actually. Indiana's coach is really known for his emphasis on defense and disciplined play. He's a real strategist, not afraid to slow the pace down and kind of control the tempo of the game. Oregon's coach, on the other hand, he likes to play fast, up-tempo, high-scoring. He wants his team to push the ball, take some risks, and create scoring opportunities in transition.
So we might see two very different approaches clashing here. Control versus chaos.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be fascinating to see who can impose their will on the game. Will Indiana be able to slow things down and make Oregon play their game? Or will Oregon's speed and athleticism just be too much for Indiana to handle?
All right, we've covered a lot of ground here, but there's one question I know our listeners are dying to know.
The million-dollar question. Who's gonna win?
That's the one. You've seen the predictions, you've analyzed the stats, you've even factored in the psychological stuff. So what's your expert opinion?
Well, if I could predict the future, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be courtside. This game is just too close to call. It's going to be a nail-biter, that's for sure.
Okay, no spoilers then. But can you give us at least one bold prediction, something specific to watch for?
Sure. Remember how we talked about Indiana's rebounding? I think Umar Bilal is going to have a monster game on the boards. I'm talking double-digit rebounds, maybe even a new career high.
Wow, that's a bold prediction.
Yeah.
But honestly, after looking at his stats, I wouldn't bet against him.
I know, right? And that rebounding battle is going to be huge. If Oregon can somehow neutralize Bilal's dominance inside, they'll have a much better shot at winning. If they can't, it could be a long night for them.
All right, there you have it, folks. We've armed you with the knowledge, the insights, and even a bold prediction. As you watch this Indiana-Oregon showdown, remember, it's not just about who wins, it's about how they win. Pay attention to the details. See if those momentum shifts we talked about actually happen, and see if our expert's prediction about Umar Bilal comes true.
And most importantly, enjoy the game. This is March Madness, baby. It's all about the upsets, the buzzer beaters, the moments that make this tournament so special.
Well said. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world of college basketball. Until then, happy